Hi, everybody, and welcome to another presentation by the Crime Victims Council of the Lehigh Valley. My name is Lauren Silva, and today we'll be talking about grief and loss, ways in which grief shows up in our life, as well as the definitions of grief, mourning, bereavement, and some ways that we can cope when we experience such things in our lives. But before we get started, let me just tell you a little bit about who we are. We are the local Rape Crisis and Victim Services Center. We are a comprehensive nonprofit private agency. So we work with anybody who has been a victim of a crime. And that could mean you as the victim slash survivor, as well as your significant others, including maybe your partner, sibling, family friend, etc. We are in Lehigh and Northampton counties. So we cover the Lehigh Valley. And if for some reason you move out of the Lehigh or Northampton County and stay within Pennsylvania, all other counties in PA has such a center. So our services are at no cost. They are confidential, and anybody ages 14 years and older do not need a parental consent to get our services. The types of services that we offer include our counseling. And with counseling, you meet with a counselor based on your needs and how often you would want to meet with them. Of course, right now we are providing telehealth services. So we use a platform called Doxy.me, which is confidential compliant, and it protects the confidentiality of your services. That is a video platform. We're also providing phone services. And of course, as things progress and change, we will be updating when we are able to bring clients back into the office. We also have police, court, and hospital advocacy and accompaniment services. So we have court advocates in the Lehigh and Northampton County courthouses, and they are there to provide support through the court and trial processes, support you through the trial, help you answer any questions that you might have, as well as if you need to go to the police station, report a crime. Our advocates and the rest of our advocates can support you and just be there with you, just like if you were in the hospital and you want an advocate to come and be with you during that process, we will come out to you. Then this outreach and community involvement piece consists of myself, another educator, as well as our supervisor. Our aim is to reach the community and discuss sexual violence and ways in which we can prevent some of the violence that occurs, and provide education awareness about different topics from bullying to harassment, healthy relationships. We are in schools. We work with as young as kindergarten through 12th grade, colleges and universities, as well as the elder population. So we really want to come together as a community and discuss some of these topics to not only make you aware, but give you some of these tools that you can hopefully prevent some of the violence in the future by having access to some of these services. And if you might not be in need of such services, it's just really nice to know that we exist in case somebody in your family or friend needs our support. And I wanted to provide you with our 24-hour 365 hotline number. If you just are not feeling safe, you need somebody to talk to, you have a question, maybe something's going on in your relationship, family or romantic relationships, you can call us You can call us at 2 a.m., 4 p.m., midnight. We will make sure that you have somebody to talk to, one of our advocates, to just check in with you, make you feel safe, and provide you with the information that you might need. So before we begin, I just wanted to check in, give you all a gentle reminder about what we're going to be discussing. It is obviously going to be a sensitive topic, so I want you to just take care of yourself and be mindful of things that come up for you. If you need to take a break, please pause the video, do something mindless, or check social media, reach out to a friend or family. I know with the holidays right around the corner, things could be a little bit more intensified, but I also really think that this topic is important because of how much we don't talk about that. So again, please take care of yourself if you need to. That is completely okay. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a manual on how to deal with grief, right? We are in Western culture, so we tend to keep grief, death, dying at a nice and safe distance. So we often leave this process up to the hospitals, other providers, funeral homes, and it's not an everyday conversation. However, perhaps we do a disservice by keeping death at such a distance. But why is it so difficult to talk about? The biggest one is that it just makes us uncomfortable. People don't know what to say. They don't know how to act. And as a result of all this discomfort, people might say some stupid, thoughtless, and just maybe mean things to grievers. And as soon as they can, we avoid the griever with the excuse that we're just giving them privacy to mourn. And what sometimes we don't recognize is if we don't talk about grief, it takes a bigger toll on us than we might think. And it represents different things in all of our lives. It could be relationships with families, significant others, and our livelihood impacts us in different ways. And grief is not about death and dying per se, it's about the actual loss and how we deal with the loss. We don't feel prepared, right? And it's unsettling to think about our own mortality. I know we're young, and yes, I am young, but thinking about, this is real and reality, and that makes us uncomfortable. And if we talk about it as well, we fear that we are traumatizing our loved ones, and we're in fear of discussing with them something that might be hurtful to them. So we shy away from connecting to those who are dying as well as who may be grieving. Now, I also wanted to take a minute to talk about avoiding euphemisms. Throughout this presentation, I will be using, death, dying, died, maybe a few euphemisms here and there, but these euphemisms sometimes create confusion. So a euphemism is a substitution of an agreeable or less offensive expression in place of one that may offend or suggest something unpleasant to the listener. So it makes it less troublesome for us as the speaker. So we tend to talk evasively about death, right? We might say that they went to sleep forever, they're in a better place, they're no longer with us, they passed away. However, when we talk about that, depending on a person's age, so if you have younger siblings, family members that may not understand finality, they might not understand how it happens and who it happens to. And they believe that death is something that happens to others, not them or their loved ones. And it only happens to the very old. So we did not think concretely when we were very young, right? So if we said to our sibling, oh, they're sleeping forever, or they were taken, they might say, well, when are they coming back? Who took them? Why are they sleeping? Are they going to wake up? And that creates confusion for them because we want to protect us, right? We want to protect from being straightforward and that fear. But again, we come at risk of leaving us confused. So we have different types of losses that doesn't necessarily always just have to be about death. And as we continue in COVID, learning from home, other types of things, keep these in mind, and you might not have recognized that these were actually losses. So we have an actual loss in where we can no longer touch, hear, or see. And this is actually, could be the death of a family member, or maybe it is a loss of a body part, loss of a job. And then we have a perceived loss. Now, this is a unique experience by the person, and it's less obvious to others. So this is how you interpret the meaning of a perceived loss. And that affects how much we feel about that loss. So they're easy to overlook, right? So let's take, for example, a friend rejected you, and now that creates a loss of confidence, or maybe a change in their status of a social group. So that's the perceived loss of what you're experiencing and what you're going through. Now we might have a situational loss that could lead to loss of function, income, goals, and self-esteem. For example, maybe you or family got into a car accident and you can't go back to school for a really long time, and it affects how you learn when you graduate, or your family member got in a car accident, they can't go back to work. So it sustains injury with some physical changes. And then the maturational loss, these are a lot of things that you are going through right now. It is necessary and it's associated with normal life transition, and it's expected across the lifespan. So going through this type of maturational loss helps you develop better coping skills to use when maybe you experience unplanned, unwanted, or unexpected losses. Thinking right now, you're learning online, that is not something that we might be useful. So you're going through that change as somebody in school. You're going and living through the COVID-19 pandemic. Think about high school, or when you will graduate in the future, leaving home. You might not be staying in touch with friends or have some other financial support. So it's about growth and development during this maturational loss. Now, I want to take the time to talk a little bit about grief, bereavement, and mourning, because they are different and they impact us in different ways. And we think about grief as linear, but in reality, it is like the picture here on your right, that it is discombobulated, messy, and there's no right or wrong way to do these things. Now, when we think about grief, grief is the process of reacting to the loss. And it's important that people can experience it through other things as well, like a symbolic type of thing, through a relationship or an important role. Maybe not being able to play sports right now, you're not a team captain. Or it could, of course, be the physical, which is the death. And we can experience mental reactions that we might be sad, anger, we might feel guilty. Physical, maybe we're having trouble sleeping. we're not really eating or overeating. Maybe some social grief that we're concerned about taking care of others in the family or seeing people, not seeing people, and returning to work. And grief really depends on the relationship, the situation, and the attachment to what we lost. So, thinking about grief as an internal expression of what is happening and what is going on with us is us responding to that grief. And grief is more than just sadness. And you might be overwhelmed with different emotions and feelings. I know for me, I am 30, and only about 4 years ago, I experienced a major, major loss. It was my grandmother. And as coming from a family who did not necessarily talk about death and dying and understanding the process, it was difficult. And I had to come through my own process in terms of certain things to understand what this meant. So we can separate grief into thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So think about how unfair was it that they were taken from us? Why did they have to do that? What I miss about them. But then understanding that they're not suffering. They're no longer sick and fighting. But then we feel maybe we're in denial that they're not really gone, or we're just feeling numb, like this can't be. We're tired, but maybe there is some sort of relief. And that relief piece, sometimes we feel guilty about, because we never want to wish somebody dead, but the relief from their pain, our pain, etc., can be comforting. And then, maybe though we're keeping busy or we're staying in bed. I know I talk to my grandmother all the time. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. I have some of her jewelry. I wear it. I want to make her proud. And, my grief comes in waves, and your grief will come in waves as well, because it initially feels intense and overwhelming, and they can come out of nowhere. But with time, the size of these waves tend to lessen with larger gaps. And as the weeks, months, years pass by, yes, you will experience many firsts as you navigate life. Your first Christmas without them, your first birthday without them, etc. But in each of these moments, it'll be natural to feel their absence, and waves of grief will be triggered again, but they will be less intense, less triggering, as you'll be able to integrate them into your everyday life. And when we deal with the tasks of grief, this is the tier model of grief, that grief is cyclical, and the TEAR just helps us remember of what we go through and that it's okay. We need to work through accepting the reality of the loss. We might be in denial, but the more that we deny, the more that we feel worse. So then we need to experience the actual pain of the loss. As someone personally who in general tends to push their feelings aside, by learning how to be more mindful, talking about my emotions and letting things be, I'm able to move through my feelings, move through grief. And then I can adjust to the new environment without the lost person, or without maybe going to school every day. And it's different for everybody, but you can find different ways of connecting. And then we're going to reinvest that into our new reality and what that's going to look like for us. So we're accepting, maybe not a person, but let's talk about school. We're accepting that we're not able to go to school right now and see our friends. We're angry, we're upset, we're mad, we're frustrated. Maybe we're happy because we didn't like school in general, But then now we're adjusting with more time going by, having to be online. Maybe we're tired of sitting in front of the camera. We're not necessarily being in person. But then what we're going to do is maybe we're going to join a book club, an online book club, or we're going to be more active and we're going to fuel ourselves with some more energy and a different way of coping with the loss that we're feeling right now about school. Now let's talk about mourning. Mourning is the outside expression. And remember, grief is that internal. So mourning is the process by which people adapt to a loss. This is influenced by cultural customs and society's rules for coping with loss. Maybe it's wearing black, lighting a candle, saving an empty chair during holidays. So every culture has its sets of beliefs that describe how the world works. And in societies in which most people share the same religion, religious beliefs significantly shape the culture. Each culture has its own beliefs and the meaning and purpose of life about what happens after death. And this informs how people in those cultures approach death. So being aware, understanding maybe our friends and how they grieve and mourn is going to be really important as we continue to grow and develop. And having such rituals and customs can help people care for how they approach death, how a person's body is handled, who handles it, how they're buried, where they're buried, or how long family members are expected to grieve, what new roles people might have, whether grief is experienced quietly and privately or loudly and publicly. So it might, again, sound strange or weird to see some of these traditions of having a body of the deceased stay at the home until traditional cremation, or Jewish tradition that they bury the body as soon as after death, and then our typical Christian tradition is where that body is remained at the funeral home before a viewing. And again, these might sound really weird talking about this stuff in morbid, quote, sad tones, but it's, again, important to be respectful of other people's traditions and knowing that maybe some of your friends actually are going through this and this is what they believe. So by being able to have some of this knowledge, you can also begin to start to accept some of these other ways, and the way that people mourn and grieve is unique to everybody. So bereavement, this is actually grief and mourning combined. So this is the period after a loss during which grief is experienced and mourning occurs. So the length of time that this lasts is dependent upon many factors. So how close to the relationship, an individual's personality and coping skills, and the experiences surrounding the death, and experiences also having experience of death before. I know for me, I mentioned my grandmother dying, but when I was, I think, 18, my uncle died. And even though I wasn't that close with him, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what was going on. And that experience, I think, caused me more harm than good because I wasn't able to grieve and mourn in a way that I am now grieving my grandmother because of such cultural norms that my family had. So it's just important to, again, be mindful and tapping into your coping skills in general. Now, when we have a loss, it's important to note that we have a loss within a loss, and this creates a snowball effect because death does not just create a single hole in one person's life. Just because my grandmother died doesn't mean that's the only thing that I lost, right? I felt like I lost part of my identity. I had a really close relationship with my grandmother that even though I'm so close with my mother, my grandma and I sort of just got each other, right? Um, Loss of dreams for the future, you know, having her meet if I had any children in the future, right? So it creates multiple losses from that primary loss. And they're unique. They can unfold over time. So being aware that these secondary losses may arise can help us assess when we're caught off guard by a new feeling of loss or pain, and they're normal and they need to be addressed. So I wanted to show you this cycle of grief. This was created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it shows us that grief is not linear, as well as we can be at any cycle, any part of the cycle at any time. I really like the top picture because of the loops, that sometimes we just are in that, and then maybe we'll come out, maybe we'll go back into that. So we have a normal functioning. Then what happens is, you know, we're in shock and denial. We can't believe that this happened. We're afraid. We don't know what's going to happen. Then we're mad. I can't believe this happened. Why did they let this happen? Then we're bargaining. And bargaining is like, if you just allow this to happen one more day, or if you just did X, Y, and Z, I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't run away. Promise I won't get mad. But when bargaining no longer suits us, we become depressed and detached. And I know it says depression and then bargaining, but these can be interchangeable. So with the depression, that's when some of this loss becomes more of the reality. Like this, it hits us and we lack energy, we're tired, we don't want to be around people. But as we move through that process, there is a time that we will get to acceptance, right? We can explore options. We have a new plan. And then we can return back to our lives where we have our meaning. We feel good about ourselves. Self-esteem is back. And we feel empowered to take control back. And we'll talk in a little bit about how grief does have some benefits. I know it's silly to say, but also about some resilience. But again, just remember that grief is not linear. There's no one way to grieve. So it's important to be that mindful process that my grief might look different than your grief, and etc. So how can we make friends with grief? How can we sort of be okay with it, you ask? So I'm going to take you on a little story about making friends with grief. At first, I tried to outrun, wait out, hide from, and ignore grief. Eventually, I realized my grief wasn't going anywhere, so I could either run from it forever or give in and experience it. Once the cloud of grief consumed me, it was hard to see or feel anything else. This sucked, but only slightly more than the running. In the early days of grief, it felt like all the light had been drained from the world and everything was dark. But as the fog of acute grief thinned, a little bit of light crept in and things started to look a little less scary and a little more manageable. I grew less intimidated by my grief and increasingly confident in my ability to handle its ups, downs, twists, and turns. Once I was able to look grief head on, I realized it's made up of both good things and bad. Grief grows from the same seeds as love, so after someone dies, one seldom exists without the other. Over time, my relationship with grief has changed. I see it now as something as nuanced, complex, and beautiful as my relationships with those who have died. Though its ongoing presence is sometimes challenging, I embrace it because it's a source of love and connection with those who have died. So I hope you can see that it does not have to be scary. And though it's complex, there are some beautiful processes that we go through and understanding of how we react, how to cope and move forward and create a beautiful story that it can integrate into our lives and we can still talk about it in a good way. So the reality is that grief does stay with us until the day you yourself die, right? Nobody in this world has not experienced grief or loss. Even when you lose your favorite pen, I know I've done that a few times. I might not be as in the grief cycle as a death of my pet, but losing some of those things, there are memories, there's meanings, and all that is valid. But as you change your relationship with grief, by changing how you respond and cope, you can find hope and healing. And if you think about it, grief is one instance where there's a strong benefit to accepting its ongoing presence because it creates space. It creates space for comfort, positive memories, and an ongoing connection that you don't have to shut them out. Now, what about the elephant in the room, COVID, right? How does COVID complicate the grieving process, right? These create situations where emotional and physical realities don't align. With COVID-19 striking, even healthy individuals and hospital policies such as limiting visitation is magnified for many families. And without potentially formally being able to say goodbye, we feel this sense of ambiguous loss. And what that is a loss without closure or clear understanding. So if somebody in our family or friends have gotten COVID and they've died, it can feel as though they really did not die, despite us knowing rationally that they really did, because maybe we were just not able to see them and we got news. And then we're not really processing it that they did die. And then we are angry that we're not able to say goodbye. So the okays of COVID is okay to know that you can have many feelings at once. You can have both good and bad days. To give yourself grace a lot to process those emotions. Studies have actually shown that your generation is taking a lot more clout into your own mental health and finding ways to stay positive and talking about mental health. So I really commend you all for doing that and practicing the mental health and talking about some of these hard topics. So it's okay to recognize that you're only in control of yourself and your own behaviors, right? It is probably hard going through all this stuff, learning at a distance, potentially not being able to communicate the way you might, but giving yourself that leeway and to take time for yourself is important. It's okay to find meaning, experience growth, feel stuck at times, right? Because if we don't feel stuck, we can't grow, okay? So with COVID-19 and then just in everything, your feelings are valid, right? We are in a different time and we might be unable to be with a loved one. And also we're experiencing other types of losses, or our families of unemployment, not making enough money, loss of maybe some support services, maybe not knowing where to go. And these losses can happen at the same time, which can complicate the grief, right? and our ability to adapt. So living in this pandemic has changed so much of how we function, including our day-to-day lives, how we care for people. And our sense of control has been challenged, right? Our routines are challenged, rituals are changing, and this might increase our feelings of isolation. So when we deal with that, then we deal with the death of a person, it's hard to manage. But maybe if our traditional services aren't offered, can we write a letter? Can we have an online celebration? Can we plant a flowering tree? And maybe we can connect with individuals asking for help. That's a very big one, even though we might not always feel like it, or just having somebody just be there is important. And having self-care and self-compassion for you, because you are going through a hard time. You're living through this, and your experience and this loss is just as important as the older adults in your life and other people. So it's important to make some connections and just being with people and reaching out when necessary. Now, what about separation and divorce? Studies unfortunately have shown during this time that divorce rates have risen, and divorce affects more than 1 million of children in the United States each year. And we know that it's never a seamless process. And a transitional time doesn't happen without some hardship, arguments, anger, and this measure of grief, right? But it's important to know that both parents love you, and it is not your fault, even though we feel angry or we feel guilty. If maybe I did better on that test, that they wouldn't be arguing about me. But the reality is that parents divorce for many reasons. Usually it happens when couples feel they can maybe just no longer live together because they fight too much, or the love that they had changed. Maybe they fell out of love with each other. Sometimes it can be a serious problem. Maybe nothing bad happens, but parents just decide to live apart. And being communicative with your family, your friends, counselors, etc., can help you move through the process of what would happen if I do have to share homes. Is my parent wanting to move out of the area? Where am I going to live? You know, we're worried about finances, or we're then having trouble focusing in school. However, if you can imagine, there are some positives that have came out of separation and divorce, where some individuals are more responsible, they're better problem solvers, better listeners, and can be better friends. Looking back on experiences, a lot of people say that they've learned coping skills that they've never thought they had, and feel stronger and more resilient of what they went through. And it might not feel like that if you're experiencing this or friends are, but it is possible. Now, this here is what we call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they state that physiological needs are to be met before anything else. So we need to have food, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, etc. And then we move up to seek our safety, feeling love, self-esteem. And a lot of these things that are met at various stages. And it's important to think about this in terms of where are you at on this hierarchy of needs? What maybe do you want to tap into or start thinking about during this difficult time of a pandemic? How are we dealing? How are we coping? But it's also important to recognize that even though this is a hierarchy of needs, there are some criticisms that it doesn't necessarily mean you need to have your physiological needs first before you feel safe. Maybe your parent is feeding you and not them in order for you to feel safe and loved, so that you don't have to go hungry, and they're putting their needs above, they're putting your needs above their own needs, creating that well-being. So if you're ever feeling a certain way, just kind of remember, are you feeling, are your needs met? Do you feel safe? Are you loved? How's your self-esteem? And how are you being the best version of you can be in this situation that is happening right now? Now, what about though one of the closest people? What happens when a family member dies, right? The family system in general is completely thrown off. And grieving family members find themselves disinterested or capable of behaving in ways that they used to. So not only are we dealing with the grief, but we're dealing with that a vital person is gone. And some of the roles might change. You might be taking on a more adult role, and that might create stress and discontent within the family. So there's always an adjustment and a shift, but recognizing that everyone faces loss at their own pace, and you can reminisce about them as often as you want. And you have that right to grieve in the way that works best for you. So if you need to talk about it, to talk about it. If you just need to listen to a song, listening to a song. As you go through that process, you'll develop those coping skills. Now, what about getting through the holidays? You know, with everything coming up and maybe experiencing some firsts, maybe this is going on another type of anniversary year. But there's things that you can do to get you through the holidays. Sometimes people choose to celebrate in a new location. A lot of times it's important to engage in self-care. And if something is too painful to talk about, you can speak up and say, I'm just not ready to talk about that. You can decline doing things that just you're not ready for. What feels right for you? And as you are young and going through this, you can adjust and adapt and create that resilience and sense of autonomy that's going to help you as you grow. But, you know, it's important to know that some of these days can create special memories or special things that you can talk about, connect, and just listen to these memories. And there's just no right way to honor the holidays or an anniversary or a special day. So important to remember some of those options and what's meaningful for you. Maybe you want to display a photo next to the menorah, or you want to set a table placemat at the table, maybe having a moment of silence, hanging a special ornament, or sharing something through social media can magnify some of that support, but it also can create, you know, also a sense of loneliness. So being mindful of how you're using social media. And just in general, I know we talked a lot about some of the heavy things that maybe you weren't necessarily prepared to hear. And I respect that. And I want you to know that we are here for you. And you can talk to your family, your friends, your counselors about what you might be experiencing and allowing yourself. So you have the right to experience it about your own way, to talk about it, the right to experience grief bursts. I know for me, I have had moments still. Grandmother passed away 4 years ago. The holidays are tough because her birthday's in December, and I just miss her tradition. So it's okay to have a moment. But it's gotten back to the point though where it's not consuming me. And I recognize that she is gone. She has died, but she's also still a part of me. And I think sometimes that's the biggest hardship of grief. So you have that right to search for meaning, what that means for you, to treasure memories, and to move toward that grief and heal. So the resilience, again, there's some positive things that, we're grateful for every day. We appreciate life. We can understand of ourselves and our strengths and what that means for us. We can develop acceptance of things I can't change, right? What are things that I can control? Because if I am worried about controlling things and having everything in my control, what really am I missing out in life that is so great? Because it helps us be more understanding of others and what they go through. So this is one of my favorite quotes with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. Promise me you'll always remember. You're braver than you believe and stronger than you seem and smarter than you think. So these are just some tips, self-care, things that you can do, developing a routine, having some new traditions, being physical, eat veggies, listen to music, find some podcasts. We're in a new age where we can really self-explore and reflect on some of these things about who we are, what we went through, and ways to move forward. And as we think of the coming year, what is important to us? How can we celebrate? It might not be a big family party that we're used to, but it's going to mean a lot as we start the new year by unplugging from the drama, listening to music, spending one-on-one time with family. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I want to thank you, and I hope you have a very happy holiday and new year. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Crime Victims Council of the Lehigh Valley. Thank you again.